Welcome back to the Learning Channel. Your Black History Hitman is here for Black History Month. We're going to do a book review on White Malice by Susan Williams. The subtitle is The CIA and the Covert Recolonization of Africa. So this is for my African brothers and sisters throughout the diaspora. We're all over the place. We're all over the place so we can try to be together, but there have been forces to try to keep us apart and not together. So we're going to break some of that down today just to set the prelude. This is 2023, just had January, a tumultuous start to the year. In Atlanta, you had this cop city problem. You got the government, counties wanting to establish a place on like some property near people's homes that will be used for military training for cops. And a protester was killed. Some people were protesting peacefully are now in jail for domestic terrorism because they were just sitting there peacefully in trees trying to get the people not to take over the land, that is the counties. That's a problem because the whole police state, policing the police, we have to study that. This is the prelude to why we're looking at this book called White Malice. Policing the police, why the policing crisis led to Black Lives Matter. Why the policing crisis led to Black Lives Matter. So this is edited by Jordan Camp and Christina Heatherton. They have a couple of articles in here and also articles from other people, but you see what happened with Tyree Nichols in Memphis. Tragedy. Tragedy, why? Because we're dealing with a situation where here this brother is trying his best to survive and he's getting beat by police. Beaten by police. So, also in January, you had some murders, mass killings. Chinese people killing Chinese people, or Asian people killing Asian people. So you got the whole white establishment saying that, see, violence is just everywhere. It's not just white people killing other people. Well, we have to look at the issue of how there are things going on in people's environments that cause them to be struggling. This is a book called Driven Out. You probably never heard the story, but the Chinese that were there in California and other places, they were driven out. They were slaves at one point. They were being used to build the railroads. The forgotten war against Chinese Americans. So the struggles that we saw, I think there was a shooting there at a dance studio in Monterey, and there's also a shooting in a place called, I think it was Half Moon Bay in California. Farm workers. So some people are frustrated. They're getting taken advantage of. People, I mean, these individuals who did the shooting are older, but you got to understand the history of their exploitation. I found this interesting because there's one part in here that says, back in the day when they had the Chinese people in certain parts of the neighborhoods and being vilified and lynched, and not as bad as black people were, but the Chinese fought back. They filed the first lawsuits for reparations in the United States, sued for the restoration of their property, prosecuted white vigilantes, demanded the right to own land, and years before Brown versus Board of Education, wanted access to public education for their children. In order to starve out towns that tried to expel them, Chinese Americans organized strikes and refused to sell vegetables. Now, listen to this. They ordered arms from China and with Winchester rifles and Colt revolvers defended themselves. Now imagine if Africans living abroad were able to get some weapons from other Africans, but we don't make the weapons. You know, you got the, I guess, Russian Kalashnikov, and you got the American AK-47. So you got these places that make weapons, the empires, so they fund wars because they make money on both sides of the war. So those African countries that were gaining independence, they were seeking those people who would help them to fight. So it'd be nice if there were African countries giving African people weapons, but we don't have it like that. So that's why we had this thing called communism and McCarthyism. That seemed to be a problem when African countries went to places like Russia to get the pressure off the oppressor off their neck, get the colonizer out of their land. They went to people who would help them. So the United States wasn't trying to free many of those African countries. They were trying to put them in a bind, and that's why we'll talk about white malice. Now, I just found this interesting. I said the Chinese called on the Chinese government, look, send us some arms so we can fight for ourselves. And we just don't seem to have that going on in the black community. And if it did, we would probably have a whole lot of fear going around. So that's just to set the tone for saying people have to be able to protect themselves. And when you have entities that are going against you to ensure that you do not unify, that's when we have to start becoming Black History hitmen to understand the story behind what had happened. So, White Malice is written by an English woman from London named Susan Williams. I think she did a thorough job of documenting stories that we don't know about what happened with Nkrumah and Lumumba based on their work to organize. And this is what the CIA was doing to make sure that Africa wouldn't be independent, but it would be recolonized. I'm just going to read a few, just a review of this book, but there's like 9, 10, 11 parts to it and about 40 chapters. United States of Africa, or the first part, the United States of Africa. 2, the CIA. 3, African Jazz. 4, America and Africa. 5, Independence, Cha-Cha. And then they have 6, which is dealing with a code word for some of the plots they were planning against Africans. And then 7, The Global Game. 8, Carrot and Stick. 9, The Turning Point. 10, The Seeds Are Sown. And 11, Dark Days. Now, just going through this, I'll just read some, not passages, but components of it to tie this all together about why we have to start fighting on an intellectual level in order to be able to really have a reason for weaponry, have a reason for establishing ways to fight for us. If you don't know the story, then you can't fight. You just think that it's, I guess, a bunch of disorganized people. No, it's been made to be disorganized. It's interesting that Kwame Nkrumah had married an Egyptian woman. So he married an Egyptian woman, so it's kind of like a little rift there in the Ghanaian community. But for him, he was like trying to create a political union between the Mediterranean-oriented North Africa and the rest of the continent. So he had a global vision. You know, Kwame Nkrumah went to Lincoln University, Pennsylvania. If you see the map from there. So he went to Lincoln University, Pennsylvania, but he's from Ghana. So he traveled from the continent all the way over to the United States and spent time in the Northern Corridor, went to Pennsylvania and spent some time in New York, worked there. So when he went back to Ghana, again, he started to organize people in 1957. They gained independence, but he then married an Egyptian woman. So when the coup was forced against him and his government, his family fled to Egypt. And they fled in a very interesting story. It's not like they just got away without a problem. No, they fled, so his family got away, and he didn't see his family for years. You know, it's just unfortunate. When the coup happened, he had to flee. So he left town also. But Egypt was an ally. The president during that time was Gamal Nasser. 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 So there were some allies that were being formed, and that was a problem for the United States. And others were trying to control Africa. So we know that Kwame Nkrumah went to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania because of Nnamdi Azikiwe. He was also a leader there in Nigeria. I remember there's a story here about Nixon going to Africa when they had the service for the inauguration for the Ghanaian independence. And there's a brother over there. It says newsreels captured Nixon grinning broadly and wielding his movie camera throughout the visit. Echoing the euphoria of his Ghanaian host, he went up to one man in jovial good humor. Slapping him on the shoulder, he asked him how it felt to be free. So this is like the white man, President Nixon, asking the black man there in Africa, how does it feel to be free? He says, I wouldn't know, sir, came the reply. I'm from Alabama. I thought that was funny. So he moves on. So she moves on. She talks about the introduction of Nkrumah coming here to the States. First few chapters in the challenge of the Congo. So she's going back and forth between Ghana and the Congo. And so in Congo is Patrice Lumumba, and in Ghana is what Kwame Nkrumah's doing. So, you know, the Congo has a really bad history of exploitation, and Congo's right there, dead center of Africa. The place that colonized the Congo is a little teeny spot right above France called Belgium. Little teeny spot controlling that central part of Africa. And there's a book I'll talk a little bit about if I can, but King Leopold's Ghost talks about how Leopold even got the idea. This is by Adam Hochschild, but talks about how Leopold got the idea to even go in there and exploit those people in so-called altruistic behavior. But he was killing the Africans like flies. So the apartheid government's going on in South Africa. United States, African people here are trying to get rid of apartheid, but the United States government supporting Israel, supporting South Africa, these two white entities that are there over there in that part of the world. The U.S. government, even a disciplined, peaceful liberation struggle was a threat to American mineral access in South Africa. It's about the resources, minerals. As it turned out, South African uranium ore was disappointing, but the uranium that was there in the Congo was what was used for the bombs that were put on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So there's some very, very real reasons why the United States government wanted to have control over the mines there in Congo and not allow the opposition, which is Russia, to get that. So in South Africa, they became problematic because, again, Africans here in America were trying to get rid of the apartheid system, but white Americans weren't too interested in removing that. So in the chapter, talks about laying out of the scramble of Africa that led to all these problems. Nkrumah actually came to the United States. I mean, he had conversations with Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King even came to Ghana for the inauguration. Did not know that. And Nkrumah insisted to changing the label from Pan-African to All-African. That's why he had the All-African People's Congress. He had Frantz Fanon involved, Paul Robeson. They were close friends of Nkrumah. They were trying to dismantle the colonizers' oppressive nature. You know, W.E.B. Du Bois ended up going to Ghana, actually died in Ghana on the day of the March of Washington in the United States. So W.E.B. Du Bois even had some connections with Ghana. Fanon, he gave a revolutionary speech at one of the first conferences they had there. And he succeeded in changing the theme of the conference from nonviolent liberation struggle to struggle by any means. So we can probably think about how Malcolm X was speaking about that here in the United States, by any means necessary. So the CIA then becomes involved in the story. So part 2 now brings the CIA in the story about how to now sequester this African revolution. And I find this problematic because it's the United States government that's doing that, and they started creating programs like the African American Institute. It's interesting, some of those places, they were like, white people were involved in those institutes, but it's called African American. It has the academics included Horace Mann Bond, who was also a president at Lincoln University, also Fort Valley State University. We can't say that he may have known about the CIA's involvement, because he may have been used like many others that Didn't find that out till later on in life. But he was also dean of Atlanta University at the School of Education. So Lincoln University is still in the house. So Horace Mann Bond had a connection with Nkrumah. So this African American Institute was funded by the CIA. So some of these organizations were not really controlled by us, but they became to be CIA plants. And so this guy named Wayne Urban, the biographer of Horace Mann Bond, tackles the issue of whether his subject was writing or unwitting, whether or not he knew that the African American Institute and this other organization, AMSAC, it's like a cultural organization. They go about the country, go about the world, and sing and dance. But it's the CIA pushing that sing and dance. So did not know if they were CIA front. So a lot of people did not know. I mean, right now in the day, who's CIA, who's FBI, who's marked as an agent? We don't know. We saw what happened with Malcolm. Years later, we find out who the agents were. So we really don't know sometimes. But the reason why we're bringing this up, because you need to know who they are. Know the names. Name the names. Interestingly, he talks about Arthur Kessler in this book. The CIA had funded the inaugural convention of the Congress in West Berlin in 1950. The event brought together more than 100 American and European intellectual celebrities, including Arthur Kessler, who wrote the book The 13th Tribe. He's the author of Darkness at Noon. So he mentioned 13th Tribe here. 13th Tribe is about how the Jewish people there may not be the original people, the Khazarian people coming from the Caucasus Mountains. So it talks about how this was funded by the CIA. And the CIA also funded a publication called the Praeger publication. Praeger. So when you see that as a publisher, CIA had some role to play in whatever that publisher was pushing. They pushed the message that the CIA wanted to be pushed. So Wally Soyinka didn't realize until later in life that he was being controlled, that he was manipulated by the CIA's programs. So didn't find out till later and was very disappointed about that. Even Richard Wright disappointed by that. They were used. So that whole disconnect between our organizations and what their missions are is problematic. So the CIA creates this kind of dissension. So you kind of think about Biggie and Tupac and the Crips and the Bloods and East Coast, West Coast, and all that's spurred on to create division. So the white man in the CIA can look back and see the continual destruction and not worry about it. That's why it's so sad for in Memphis to see those brothers beating down another brother. It's like what the slave patrols have now turned on us. Now we're acting like the colonizer. Chapter 6. Africa has become the real battleground. So the All African Peoples Conference became a theme for other people like George Padmore from Trinidad. Kwame Nkrumah brought him there to Ghana to help out. He died too young. Lumumba was there. He was like a neophyte in the midst of this governmental stage because he wasn't like really educated like the others. It didn't go to the major university systems. So he became revolutionized going to this movement. He had the movement for National Congolese in the Congo. So he became a threat to the Belgian, and that's why the CIA and the Belgians and all them plotted against him and had him killed. He died in 1961, actually. So the story and the books are told about all that led up to the death. Lumumba believed that de Gaulle spoke in good faith. That's President de Gaulle. He was therefore appalled by the reaction of the French when Guinea voted against remaining in the French community and in favor of self-government. The only French colony in Africa to do so during that time period is 1958. Look at today with Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, all those places telling the French to get out. Gabon, Togo, telling the French to get out. So there may still be some relationships that are going to continue, but get out because you're creating too much disruption. So France was furious. Just like France was furious at Haiti for kicking their butt and made Haiti pay reparations. We have to stop this. We have to understand the continual control. That's why it's called Recolonization of Africa. It was a savage response to the referendum slogan of the first president of Guinea, that is Sekou Touré. Guinea prefers poverty and freedom to riches and slavery. So Sekou Touré, Amilcar Cabral, all these African leaders during this time period, including Nkrumah, were coming together to rise up, and the CIA was doing whatever they could to dismantle that. JFK became involved, because it all became down to the resources and the minerals there in Congo. They wanted that uranium from this mine place, I think it's called Chico Lobwe. So atomium. So it's talking about this like gigantic model they built there in Brazil, in Brussels, that had a model like of an atom, but it was all about exploiting the resources to make these bombs. And so they talk about the CIA becoming more involved in ensuring that they can divert the Russians from getting that, divert anybody else from getting that, and then the United States maintain control over the Cold War and weapons. So it goes on, talks about this guy named Harold Hochschild, the chairman of the board of trustees of this American Metal Climax. So Hochschild, his son, wrote this book called The King Leopold's Ghost, a story of greed, terror, and heroism in colonial Africa. So now that goes back in time when the explorers and Leopold went into Africa, but Hochschild was later on when those organizations were established, like Cicero's in Southern Africa, naming these two countries after him, Northern Rhodesia and Southern Rhodesia, was all about exploiting their resources. So it starts to talk about this guy named Maurice Templesman, who became when JF Kennedy died, he became the, boyfriend of Jackie Kennedy. And this guy's in the diamonds, and so he's doing whatever he can behind the scenes. He's not in government. He's not CIA. He becomes a person who's interested in the mineral resources. Like you see all those movies going on now with Avatar and Wakanda Forever, and so there's vibranium, there's unobtainium. All those are fictitious movies, but talking about the real story of the colonizers coming into Africa trying to take the diamonds and the resources and the uranium to make bombs. So Maurice Templesman becomes a problem because that dynamic of controlling the diamond resources and the De Beers and the Oppenheimers, all this is connected, and how the CIA propped them up. In 1975, 7 years after leaving the CIA, Whitman published A Matter of Intelligence, a novel, espionage, or a novel. It is threaded with details relating to ballistic missiles, the CIA, and the Pentagon. Now, you know what movie's about? You know that movie that, what's his name? Nicolas Cage played in? Lord of War? I think that was 2005, but all this is about the history of people using weapons and going in there. Think about blood diamonds and, killing the people. Leo DiCaprio going in there and just see the people killing one another for the white man getting those diamonds. So part 3 goes to the African jazz. Why is this mentioning that? Because it's talking about the influence of our entertainers going over to Africa to kind of create a scenario where we're singing and dancing. Louis Armstrong was involved in that. He didn't realize he was being involved, followed by the CIA, and there was manipulations going on there. The Congo was now a major interest. Movement National Congolese was what Lumumba was leading. So he was from a part of the Congo down by Leopoldville. You had other parts and provinces that were going on, and other leaders were going down there, like this guy in Kasavuba. So you had this connection where you had the CIA involved manipulating the people. So one person who came as a whistleblower, I guess you could say that, John Stockwell, used to be in Angola, and he has a story that talks about this, I think, enemies. In Search of Enemies. I think John Stockwell's book. I talked about him before. So, let's see. Moving on, you know, Lumumba picked a guy named Mobutu to be his military leader, and that was a mistake. He was a puppet, and we talked about him already in another video. I don't want to talk about him right now. But Lumumba became a CIA plant, and he had Lumumba killed. So Mobutu became a CIA plant. He had Lumumba killed. Moving on, the names and the people and the discourse between going back from Congo and Ghana. The author does a great job. How the CIA then has these people that are coming from abroad, like in Kenya, coming here and they're funding these students to go to white universities, not HBCUs but PWIs. Thomas Mboya was one of them. People question whether or not he was CIA involved. John Henry Clark wrote a book called African Notes on African World Revolution. And he has there, Thomas Mboya, he has a chapter on him. But beyond Thomas Mboya, Barack Obama's daddy was one of these people that came over on the CIA program. You have to start asking questions about long-term plans. Long-term. So the fact that this guy named Obama came out of nowhere and became a president, kind of wonder how that happens. But his daddy was in a CIA program, and that's what happens with many of these foreign leaders or foreign people coming to the United States. They don't go to HBCUs. Like I said, they go to places like Iowa, Hawaii, where you don't have a lot of black people. So Adam Hochschild, again, he's talked about the story of how this was created. The idea to want to go steal that land from the people. Cobalt, which was mined in the Congo, was indeed a strategic mineral of great value to the United States. However, it was nowhere near as critical as the uranium from the Shinko Lobwe mine. It is possible that this guy named Devlin, who was the CIA, was using the word cobalt as a cover for uranium, as it had been used in World War II. Congolese uranium ore had been packed in barrels marked special cobalt for the journey from Shinko Lobwe to the United States. Now, you know that could happen, and you saw what happened in that movie called American Gangster, where the brothers now, transporting cocaine in coffins. Oh, like the CIA didn't know that was going on. Like the government didn't know that was going on. Not worried about it when it's destroying black communities. So they were doing that to the uranium, mislabeling it, and bringing it here to the United States. So you got the Congress, you got people like the so-called House Ways and Means Committee, grilling people like Paul Robeson, attacking people like James Baldwin. And I just read in this storyline that Paul Robeson, they had him in a insane asylum, in a mental health institute, because they may have drugged him. Stuff that was kind of mentioned in here. Back and forth with the Soviet Union, and the Khrushchev supported Lumumba when he came to the United Nations to give a speech. And a lot of people supported Lumumba. Lumumba came here and tried to meet with Eisenhower. Eisenhower went golfing. Didn't want to listen to him. Listen to that today, African people. This guy named Zelensky came to the United States and spoke at the Congress. Welcoming audience. Lumumba didn't get that when he was fighting for the freedom of African people. So we have to start questioning those people in positions of power. Where do they really stand? This guy there's a mayor in Atlanta called Andrew Dickens, who's now supporting this cop city. That's not supporting black people's interests, but he is a pawn in the game. Prior to that, there was another black mayor who supported the cop city and laid the groundwork in the Congress. You got this guy named Hakeem Jeffries, strong opponent, strong supporter of Israel. No problem. That's what you want to do, because that's what his constituencies are pushing. But the minute Palestinians are even spoke about, becomes a problem. So we have to check the people who are really in positions, and they may not be supporting your cause. That's why the government becomes a problem. St. Clair Drake, he was an African-American sociologist. I got his book, Black Folks Here and There. He was in Ghana. Just interesting to see all the layouts of the names of the people that she brought up. That is Susan Williams. I thought it was great that she did that. Uh, by early 1960, freedom fighters were flocking to Ghana from South Africa, Rhodesia, Tanganyika, Algeria, Cameroon, Angola, and other European ruled colonies. The Bureau of African Affairs provided them with visas, clothing, a small stipend, basic toiletries, literacy classes. But listen today what's happening with brothers and sisters trying to cross the borders in Togo and Benin. Got a brother that does a lot of travel, I think it's Wode, W-O-D-E. He's facing problems just trying to go across borders. Why are Africans treating ourselves like that? Africa should be able to be a place where we can travel freely, but it's not like that. That's how it was in the past. Europeans created those borders. So moving on, again, propaganda. I think about all the things that happened because Garvey's not mentioned. This is all post-Garvey. But Garvey, you know, they were attacking him too. Europeans, they want to control the discourse. So for 3 hours a day, explained Nkrumah in a speech to mark the opening of the Ghana External Broadcasting Service, programs were broadcast from Accra in Arabic, English, French, Hausa, Portuguese, and Kiswahili. So he created a radio station and also a what do you call it? A magazine. So Voice of Africa. So Nkrumah was doing whatever he could to counteract the CIA support of certain things like Voice for America. Now he had Voice of Africa. So he was all about the United States of Africa. So it goes back and forth, and it talks about America's CIA agent and Kenyan CIA asset. That's what I'm saying now. You know that past president here, we had relationships with Kenya and CIA, and we got to start asking the questions because that person killed an African. You know that. That person that was in the place here killed an African. Muammar Gaddafi. An African man killing another African man. You gotta ask the questions. How did this happen? Ask the questions, people. Independence, cha-cha. Man, they used to have those Congolese people acting like people in a zoo. What do I mean by that? There's a book I have called Otabenga. O-T-A-B-E-N-G-A. Otabenga. They had this brother, they called him a pygmy. But over there in the Congo, he was helping out the white people to know where to go and explore. They brought him here and put him in the Bronx Zoo, like an animal. They were already doing that in Brussels when they were bringing these Congolese to the people in Belgium, so the Belgian people could see how these people lived. But reality is, those people never went to Congo. That was just a colony of theirs. King Leopold II never went to Congo, but he's governing it from abroad, dictating what should be happening with those resources. And that's why when you put the puppets in place like Mobutu, it's easy for them to control the resources. So that's why Malcolm X and Frantz Fanon and all these people who are trying to now dismantle this colonizer effect, they become marked people. So fast forwarding, because again, I can't read the whole book to you. I just want you to understand how important this book is. Got a chapter called Things Fall Apart. You know, Chinua Achebe wrote a book about that, Nigerian novelist. But things started falling apart, and they had to do whatever they could to maintain the resources. As of Mobutu, Lumumba made a serious blunder by picking him, and people told you, people around him, don't pick that guy, don't trust him. But he had a soft heart and wanted to work with him. So Nkrumah did whatever he could to support Lumumba. Chapter 17, Eisenhower snubs Lumumba. Biden supports Zelensky. So you start to see where the mission is. It's not for African independence. It's for white people to continue on to what control. It says right here on page 206, the Airlift Africa Project, as it was called, had already brought a number of African students to study in the U.S., including Washington Okumu from Kenya. In 1962, it would bring Barack Obama Sr., the father of the former president Barack Obama. The project was underwritten by the Kennedy Foundation and the African American Students Foundation, of which Ralph Bunche was a director. The actor, Sidney Poitier, and baseball player Jackie Robinson, who was the first African American to play Major League Baseball, also gave time and funds to the foundation in which their wish to support the education of young people in Africa. But of course, we know the CIA has alternative plans, and they manipulated the situation, and they continue to do so. You just must know the names. That's why the CIA should not have been in Black Panther. They shouldn't have been having a role in Wakanda Forever. You need to cut that out. Get rid of that influence so we can understand it. So Lumumba, he became too big. His balls were too big. He was fighting, and he would stand up to the forces. So he was trying to make the profit for the people, not like Mobutu, who ended up taking all that money and putting it in Antwerp in other parts of the world and taking away from the people there in Africa. Tricked. African people were tricked. So a lot going on here with secession. That is, parts of the Congo started to split up, just like the United States. You got white people today want to secede from the Union. That's what happened to the Civil War, but you got people still doing it, because January 6th was last, when those I don't know what you call them, those people that went to the Capitol to try to destroy the property, try to take over the government. Some of those people want to secede from this United States government. Well, that was going on in other parts of Africa, like the Congo. So bribery, because this is now going on to YQ Prop. This is just a code name for some of the missions. And so they had different missions, and in the missions, they got the names of these people: Burden, Devlin, Timberlake. Got to know the names of the people. We know basketball players and football player names, but do we know the people that did destruction to our communities? We must know those names. And so the author has even some pictures of the people who were involved. So get the book so you can see who they were. Talks about the Pan-African Congress. I think my colleague Kwame told me about this guy named Mangalisa Robert Sobukwe. You don't hear much about his work, but he was a Pan-African Congress. He was part of the Pan-African Congress in South Africa. So was Steve Biko. Steve Biko was a revolutionary. So all those, he was assassinated, also young. These people didn't live a long life. And here we are sitting around here acting like things are okay. And we can just keep on watching football games, basketball games like it's okay. No, they're going to attack you. So we have to be understanding of this. So the CIA was manipulating a whole lot of stuff. So they also pushed this communist plan. Like anybody who's speaking up against white power and seeking their freedom and asking for the Soviet Union to assist them, they must be communist. So that's why we had Martin Luther King and Robeson and people like that attack, be called communist. Patrice Lumumba would seek assistance from them, and so would Kwame Nkrumah. We had to seek assistance from them. And so that's why when the United States brought those African countries here in December, 49 African countries, except for South Africa, because the South African president was going through some problems. The United States government is trying to tell those African people what to do. That doesn't work anymore, because those Africans were not supporting the cause of what they want the United States government wanted to do for Ukraine and going against Russia. Those African countries said, look, Russia has provided us with support. So this East-West thing, this conflict between melanin recessive people, Ukraine, Russia, United States, these governmental structures, those are melanin recessive people problems. But they're now impacting other individuals throughout the world. So not Dulles, but Dulles. The Dulles Airport in Virginia is named after the ex-CIA director, and wasn't a good man for African people, but we got an airport named after him. So the lies were being concocted, leading all up to, again, when Lumumba was actually assassinated in January of 1961. Later that year, Fanon dies, 1961. So Lumumba was assassinated, but Fanon died of something called like leukemia. His comrade, that is Fanon's comrade, named Felix Mume, was deported to Ghana. On arrival, he met with Fanon, who was in Accra at the time, and together they went to see Nkrumah. The president had just asked Mume to write a report on what he had witnessed in the Congo. On 1st October, Fanon and Mumi left Ghana for Rome. From there, Fanon went to Cairo and Mumi went to Geneva. Within weeks of his arrival, Mumi was poisoned by an agent of the SCDECE, the French Foreign Intelligence Service, who put thallium in his drink during dinner at a restaurant. The 34-year-old suffered agony in the hospital for 2 weeks, eventually dying November 3rd, 1960. This devastated Fanon. But guess what? Fanon died of leukemia a year later. You have to ask those questions. In this book, Frantz Fanon, The Psychology of Oppression by Hussein Buhan, there's a segment in here where it talks about Fanon he got leukemia and he was still fighting, still writing, because he wrote The Wretched of the Earth on his deathbed. He went to Moscow to get assistance, to try to get help. Moscow's treatment wasn't as well, so he said, you might have to go to the United States. So he went to the National Institutes of Death, called NIH, that's what they call it. But National Institutes of Death. CIA people interrogated him in the hospital bedroom, or actually in a hotel room. And he died, that is Fanon, in the United States. He loathed the United States. He didn't really want to come here. But whatever took him out with that leukemia, so he died in December of 1961, and all these deaths really impacted Nkrumah, because those were his revolutionary warriors. So when Nkrumah was actually kicked out, he was able to go to Guinea for refuge. So the poison plot plan, we have to question even what Nkrumah had passed away from. I think there's a part in here, he had prostate cancer. It spread. I think they called it like leukemia also in here too. I wonder how that happens like that. So Nkrumah was almost lived twice as long as Lumumba, 36 years old passed. Fanon, 36-year-old when he passed. So our warriors, they provided long-lasting names, books, information, words for us to carry on today. But if you don't know them, it doesn't matter. So as a Black History Hitman, I want you to know the names of these people who fought for your freedom. Not the ones who caused the destruction like Mobutu. But again, pictures. The Atomium, this like gigantic model in the middle of Brussels. And you got Frantz Fanon giving a fiery speech. Revolutionize folks to say, look, you got to take up arms to fight your oppressor. Because he was in Algeria helping out with the Algerian Revolution. So the global game, again, geopolitics, I talked about that in another video. You got Mobutu there, sitting there, enjoying his time with the president, Nixon. He met with all the presidents, told you that before. Fast forwarding, all the hypocritical things going on with U.S. politics. Eisenhower's apparent support of the autonomy of the Congo was, however, deeply hypocritical. His government was actively targeting the legitimate government of the Congo. And look what's happening right now in Peru. Look what's happening in these countries where you had democratically elected people. In Bolivia, they try to get rid of Morales. Anytime the indigenous people, those that are a part of the land, are now in control, or now trying to lead, the United States government gets involved. And then the problem with this is that you see what happened to Haiti. Same thing. That leader was killed. And now you have some foreign agents that are involved in that. Say people from Venezuela, Colombia, or United States, and they're being prosecuted now. And there's a day for that. But these leaders are being attacked by the system. The UN leader, Dag Hammarskjöld, died in a plane crash. He was supportive of the non-aligned countries, but he was a problem to the white movement. And even in here, it talks about NATO being a problem. And this goes back in time talking about that. The whole McCarthyism that we see, not the McCarthy that's in the Congress today, but the McCarthyism about getting rid of people thinking about communism. Lumumba sells U.S. on uranium. So uranium becomes the storyline. All these movies we're seeing now about the minerals and resources that the colonizers trying to get. For Nagasaki and Hiroshima, those bombs came, the uranium from those places. That's why the The resources are more important, not the people. The resources. Iran, same kind of scenario where they upset the government. The reference to Mohammad Mossadegh, Iran's prime minister in 1951-53, was intended by Castro to spotlight the danger to Lumumba. Mossadegh had been overthrown in a coup orchestrated by the CIA and M16 after he nationalized the Iranian oil industry, previously owned by the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which is now known as BP. Yeah, that BP gas you get, British Petroleum, it was Anglo-Persian oil. Like Lumumba, Mossadegh had been democratically elected and was a champion of secular unity in his country. And then the carrot and the stick, it starts to go on. We talk about the manipulation of governments and how you got the media involved. And we fast forward today with how people are saying that the Russians are involved in controlling American politics, and that becomes a game because, you know, that's not going on, but that's the storyline. So the end of the book, the turning point, Lumumba and his family, I mean, he had to get his family out of the Congo. So they had him locked up and pinned up in a certain place, and he escaped, but he was fearful of leaving because if he escaped, then he knew there'd be reason for them to kill him. But he got his family out, and they were able to flee. So it was a manhunt for Lumumba. It's chapter 28. So the story is told in a riveting manner. It really captures your attention. At one point, at the All African People's Conference in Accra, held 2 years earlier, Nkrumah had energetically supported the pathway of Gandhian nonviolence in order to achieve freedom. No longer. He now shared the view expressed so eloquently at the conference by Frantz Fanon that when attacked with violence, it was necessary to retaliate. This is what feared the colonizer. So he had no choice but to seek weaponry from places like Russia. CIA became involved to now thwart that connection. Pan-Africanism started having other countries, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, were getting together, and they were organized by the Arab Republic. So Nasser was very important in that. And so what we saw about the Arab Spring that came up in a few years ago, where they were trying to protest against their autocratic governments, it's still going on today. So I found this riveting because it tied in a lot of names. Frantz Fanon, I might do something on Frantz Fanon later on, but there's a lot of work on him. But Frantz Fanon, I mean, he was the impetus for getting folks to say, you got people attacking you. You're going to have to fight back. You can't wait for the CIA and the colonizers to change their mindset and want to be nice to you. No. These people are devilish in the things they've done, and the poisoning and the drugs. Paul Robeson thinks that he was drugged, and that's why he had those paranoid fits and had to be in a mental health institute for a little bit. Paul Robeson was the man, though. This guy was an orator. He was a fantastic athlete, and now he's put in this position where he is questioning his sanity, and I'm sure it has to do with drugs that were put into his system. Fanon to die at 36, I'm sure it was something put in his system. CIA has a whole history of that. America's Angola, or Angolan. Don't have time to go over that, but that really talks about Jonas Savimbi and that whole UNITA and MPLA and these organizations in Angola who were being supported by the Russians, Soviet Union, rather at that time, and then America, and then they're all in there, because that's Angola is right here, right next to Congo. So Angola becomes a strategic place. The river that was coming out from the Congo to the Atlantic Ocean, many of the Europeans had never gone further in. They allowed these Africans to kill themselves and fight and destroy and create problems and not worry about going inland. So they had these puppets like Jonas Savimbi that became a leader, but he was a vicious leader. So Angolan politics, and that guy John Stockwell was in Angola, and stepped away from the CIA and has told us about the problems that were going on with the CIA involvement there. So the intelligence agencies from South Africa, Israel, France, they were all in cahoots. They had these so-called African freedom fighters for these like events, cultural freedom. So Soyinka, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Chinua Achebe, all these people were now manipulated, but didn't know they were being manipulated. They were being put out there in the forefront to have an impact on society, but it wasn't supported by revolutionary movements, supported by the CIA. So closing in on Nkrumah, again, he had to flee Ghana after the coup and went to Guinea. You know, there was two sides to Guinea in terms of the colonizer controlling that part of the world. Kenneth Kaunda supported him. He was the head of Kenneth Kaunda, I think Northern Rhodesia at the time, so Zambia. You know, and Robert Mugabe was the leader of Zimbabwe, and they vilified him because he said Africa for the Africans and told the white people to get off the land and give it back to the people you stole it from. That becomes a problem. So all these names are filtered through here. Talks about Malcolm, talks about Castro. Castro came to United States, and of course they tried to poison him and kill him, but he stayed in Harlem. Everybody came to visit him in Harlem because he became like a figure, a freedom fighter. And so people today who dismiss Castro, dismiss Putin, dismiss anybody that's fighting for freedom, it becomes a problem about where you stand. That's why if you don't support Israel, you're automatically anti-Semitic. We got to be careful about the labels. We have to be more focused on what's going on beyond the label, as what is people's actions. And that's what's most important when we start looking at how you now make an impact on making change in society. If you're going on with the program, you're not making any changes. So it talks about the dark days of Ghana, and he passed away in Bucharest, Romania. That is Nkrumah, at the age of 62. So not a long-lived life, but he was diagnosed with prostate cancer that had spread, resulting in leukemia. Frantz Fanon had leukemia. I'm telling you, I think these brothers were taken out physically. So, chapter 40, the dead hands. The avoidance of written records is a barrier not only to public knowledge, but also to the U.S. government's own institutional memory. I'm going to read this last part right here, because this really signifies the manipulated story. Let me conclude on this, the manipulated story. This is the CIA and how they deal with documents, because we have this guy in jail right now. Not even jail. Yeah, he's in jail. Julian Assange. All he did was report stories like this. And he was attacked and vilified. He didn't kill anybody, didn't shoot anybody. Like Daniel Ellsberg, didn't shoot anybody, didn't kill anybody. They were presenting documentation about what governments have been doing to other governments, or what's doing to you and your freedom. Forget the governments, you personally. That's why when we have to make changes in society, you have to address it on a, not so much a self-interest level, but a level that deals with where do you stand on this. I don't want my money going to make bank tanks and bombs to go kill people. I don't want that. But that's where my tax money's going. How do I stop that? You could vote people in to make a change, but some of those people then get bought out by the people who don't want the change. So we have to know the names of the people, but understand the game. So Julian Assange should be freed. They're trying to extradite him and prosecute him to be in jail for like 200 years. Something crazy, but it's all about attacking people who are providing resources. But look at this. The avoidance of written records is a barrier, not only to public knowledge, that's why you will never know it, but also to the U.S. government's own institutional memory. My goodness, you got Trump hiding stuff at his property outside of D.C. You got now Biden, they say, hiding paperwork at his property in his garage. How does that happen? Almost guaranteeing that mistakes of the past will be repeated. Worse, it is a monumental problem for the people living in the countries that were infiltrated by the CIA, who wish to know and understand their history to its fullest extent. You will never know your history to its fullest extent if you got people manipulating the knowledge. So white malice is explaining the malice is do whatever you can to stay on top. We are in a position as Africans throughout the diaspora, because again, I'm speaking to Africans on the continent, Africans out of the continent, Africans everywhere. We have to understand the game. The game's going to continue to change if you don't understand it. Make your own game. That's why the African countries are waking up right now to say, we don't abide by all that you say we should do, colonizer. This is what we've decided to do now. But if we don't support one another to do that, it doesn't mean anything. So, please do your tests. Please do your work. Read on your own, not just from what I share with you. Read, organize groups, share this information, and make a change in your little world so we can impact the bigger world. Thanks for attending the YouTube channel, the Learning Channel.